Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be in the States. Welcome to today's webinar from iPass. Today we're going to be talking about how iPass is combating new Wi-Fi security threats. My name is Neil Griffiths. I look after product marketing in iPass, and I'm going to be your host today. Just one quick housekeeping item. This On24 session does have the ability to post questions, so please go ahead. We have some moderators who will be picking up questions and signing them out and bringing them to my attention as we go through this session, so please don't be shy. Ask any questions. In this deck, we're just going to talk briefly about some of the kind of security threats that we see emerging, and we'll talk about how iPass is dealing with the current security threats and some things that we're doing to kind of keep one step ahead of some of the emerging threats that we see. And right at the end of the presentation, for folks who don't know much about iPass, we have one slide just about iPass. So let's get going. So what are we here to talk about? Well, all the industry analyst reports are telling us that mobile attacks and vulnerabilities are increasing. Certainly there was a big spike in 2015 in terms of news stories and attacks that made it into the news media. But just the fact that these aren't being covered in the news media doesn't mean to say that there aren't an ongoing issue with attacks on mobile users. And these attacks can be very damaging. Just one attack can result in significant financial or reputational damage to an enterprise. One of the challenges, though, is that 60% of mobile data is going to be running over Wi-Fi by 2015. Enterprise users are becoming increasingly mobile and taking their devices out of the enterprise. And they're choosing to connect to Wi-Fi quite often because of the enhanced QoS and the bandwidth needs of their applications. So we're tending to find that enterprise users are moving outside the enterprise firewall and are connecting to Wi-Fi networks increasingly to get their jobs done wherever they happen to be. One of the challenges is that some of these Wi-Fi networks are perhaps, especially the public networks, are perhaps not as secure as they could be. And in fact, most public Wi-Fi, especially open Wi-Fi that doesn't require a password, is inherently insecure. But even the stuff that actually has a captive portal or some kind of login has varying levels of security. So we see issues out there as a Wi-Fi operator around poorly implemented radius-based authentication, open radio bearers that aren't protected by passwords, unprotected backhaul. You can protect the radio side of a Wi-Fi connection as much as you like, but if your backhaul away from the Wi-Fi infrastructure into the rest of the internet is unprotected and is easy to break into, then it's kind of a moot point whether you're protecting the radio side. We're also seeing an increase in access point spoofing, which is really resulting in a kind of a new set of attack vectors around sniffing for login credentials, man-in-the-middle attacks, data modification, identity spoofing and phishing as a result of captured user credentials. And we're also seeing emerging threats around injection attacks where people are injecting malicious code onto users' machines by compromising the Wi-Fi side of a connection and injecting malware into users' machines to either collect personal information, collect login information, or to drop a bot onto that device to potentially drive denial of service attacks. So Wi-Fi, and especially public Wi-Fi, can be a somewhat high-threat environment for enterprise users as they're moving around outside the enterprise. Banning public Wi-Fi consumption by enterprise IT admins kind of doesn't work. We see a lot of motions within enterprises to try and get their users to stay away from public Wi-Fi and try and use things like Wi-Fi devices or 3 and 4G cellular connections. Doesn't kind of work quite a lot of the time because sometimes users will consciously connect to Wi-Fi because they get better performance, better throughput for the application that they're using, or they may be trying to tether to a device whose battery is on the fritz. Or sometimes people connect to Wi-Fi unconsciously. Certain types of OS are pretty aggressive at connecting, especially if they've previously been connected to a particular SSID. They're pretty aggressive at reconnecting to that SSID. So sometimes a user will take the path of least resistance, and if the device gets connected and they're able to connect to their apps and do their stuff, they're kind of not too worried about the underlying security of the service. There is some elements of user education that can make a difference, really emphasizing that people should be connecting to any web property using HTTPS, and they shouldn't be overriding browser warnings around certificate warnings and issues around that. Two-factor authentications to access any enterprise apps or any apps in the cloud is also a very good idea. And obviously, users should be disabling file sharing because that can be an injection path for malware onto the device. In the future, a lot of people say, oh, well, Hotspot 2.0 and 802.1x are really going to make a lot of these issues go away. Yeah, kind of. They're going to kind of do a better job of securing the radio bearer side of the connection, but not necessarily the uplink side of the connection, or a couple of other aspects which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And also, Hotspot 2.0 in the public domain, in terms of public deployments, is still really in its infancy. We run a network of 60 million hotspots globally, working with around about 160 vendors to provide that capacity. And we see only about between 5 and 7% of that capacity is actually Hotspot 2.0 compliant right now. People are making bold statements about plans to migrate, and there are plans to migrate, but it's going to take a very long time before the majority of public footprint is actually migrated to Hotspot 2.0. So, sometimes, steering users away from using public Wi-Fi and trying to educate them about best practices and hygiene around this kind of thing, sometimes none of it works, and sometimes you have to protect users from yourselves. And that's certainly been iPass's experience, which is why we spent a lot of time over the past 5 years in really ruggedizing and securing our service by overlaying a number of different technologies and techniques on top of the infrastructure that we're acquiring organically or inorganically to really bring all of the footprint and all of the access and all of the security that's offered to all of our users up to the same level, irrespective of the type of access infrastructure that they're actually accessing the service via. So our approach is to treat our whole service as a complete attack surface, and I'll talk about what that means a little bit later on, but in more detail. But essentially, we're thinking about everything from the client side all the way through the access infrastructure and the infrastructure that we're acquiring all the way up through into our platform, and then how we integrate with our providers, billing and authentication systems at the upstream side of our network, to really understand that entire platform as a potential attack surface, and then look at each individual component and understand where the attack vectors may be against individual components, and also be able to kind of think about the whole thing as a whole, so that if you have an attacker that tries to attack and then gets deflected and then mounts a horizontal attack, that we can actually kind of guard in defense against that. And the whole idea is to secure the unsecure, is to be kind of almost unconcerned with what the security is of the access infrastructure, but to overlay our own capabilities on top of that, to really bring all connections and all transport of user data up to a very high level of secureness. And we don't kind of do this as a one-off activity for a few weeks a year and then kind of stop and give up and go and hang out and do something else. The security and monitoring and validating our platform for security is a continuous and ongoing process, because there are people out there who are trying to continuously compromise our network and get to our users and steal their data. We also do a lot of research to make sure that we're trying to stay one step ahead of emerging attack vectors and emerging techniques for bad actors out there who may come to us to try and compromise our users' data. Because we do have, if you look at our customers and partners, we have a lot of blue chip companies, enterprise companies, including some very big management consultancies that are handling a lot of potentially sensitive client data across our platform. So we have to make sure that the service is as secure as humanly possible. We also have a number of carrier and server provider partners and all customers around the world. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on when we talk about how we secure the platform and how we make sure data at rest is encrypted and policies around that. They're sometimes sharing PII data with us onto our platform, and obviously they have regulatory constraints and licensing constraints around making sure that PII data for their users is secure, irrespective of what third-party platform it winds up on. So we place a great deal of store in making sure that that data is protected, and we'll talk a little bit about this platform aspects of that a little bit later on. So let's get into some specifics about what we do. So say a user shows up at a location where they'd like to connect to iPass. Well, the first thing is that to get onto if you're a hotspot and you're being added to the iPass network, you don't just get added to the iPass network and we throw a switch and then that hotspot is available for people to connect to. We spend a long time validating new footprint and new hotspots and new locations, and monitoring and validating them for quite some period of time before we actually accept them into the network as valid footprint. And we're looking for things that are, telltales around that this may be a malicious hotspot. So we're making sure that the BSSID and SSID pair stays the same over a certain period of time. We compute the location of every hotspot within our network to a very high degree of accuracy. So we're making sure that that hotspot stays in the same place for a specific period of time. We're monitoring previous connection history and previous probe history. Our client, even though you may be connected to one hotspot, our client is actually probing other hotspots that may be accessible in the background. And it's doing that just in case you need to move to a different hotspot because you may be physically moving. But we're also checking other footprint that we would like to bring into the network over a period of time. And we run continuous probes to make sure that the authentication is up to scratch and the throughput is up to scratch. And only after we've run through all the checks that you can see here, and quite a few more that we're not really going to talk about today, do we actually accept footprint into the network and it gets added into our whitelist. And it can take about over 100 probes from clients, either actively or passively in the background, before we say, yeah, that hotspot is not a rogue. It's not been maliciously placed there to act as a honeypot. It's valid footprint, and we're going to accept that into the network. If at any time during the probing stage or at the stage that or once the footprint is in our network as a whitelisted hotspot, if we suspect for any reason that there's something amiss with that hotspot, either it's been taken over or it's been somebody's set up a rogue AP next to it, broadcasting the same SSID and trying to swamp the curated hotspot and trying to pull users to that honeypot, we will take out both of those BSSIDs, the MAC address level SSIDs. We will take those out of the network and we'll put those into a blacklist. And we're super conservative about this. We blacklist stuff very, very quickly, and it takes a very, very long time for stuff to come out from the blacklist and back into the production footprint. So part of the phase one of iPass security is making sure that the infrastructure is real infrastructure that we've acquired from vendors, and that it's not being spoofed by a rogue hotspot, and that it's actually performing up to spec, that the throughput is adequate, that there aren't delays in terms of authentication. There's a bunch of other parameters and tests that we do against hotspots before they actually get added into the network. So phase one of security is making sure we've eliminated rogue hotspots. Step two is, and this is related to hotspot validation, is really being quite stringent about how we check for gateway certificates. We really scrutinize gateway certificates to make sure that they've not been manipulated, that they're perfectly well formed, that they're reflective of the correct CA. And this is another phase that we go through as we're validating a hotspot to bring it into the production environment. So phase two is validating the authentication layer of a new hotspot is actually valid and that the certs haven't been manipulated or altered in any way. Stage three is, and this is where users are actually now starting to connect to the platform via this newly curated footprint, is authentication. And we do a couple of things with authentication. First off, the first time you sign into iPass, we use a pretty robust encryption scheme to send your credentials up to the iPass platform. And once you're authenticated against the iPass platform, those credentials are not used again unless you have to reauthorize or reactivate, or maybe you wipe the device and you want to put the clients back on and stuff like that. But that credential never gets used again. So you have to be really, A, the credential is very well encrypted, and B, you have to be in really the right place at the right time for the first time a user uses the service to even see that credential go up to our network and be authenticated. Once you've been authenticated, we actually pivot to a token-based authentication scheme where we issue a one-time password down to the user's device that's used the next time they log in. And there are all kinds of protections around that and sequence numbers and time to live, so that even if you were able to get into a device and get a hold of that one-time token, chances are you wouldn't actually be able to actually log in using that, because we actually hash it with a bunch of other things on the device. Just to speak about the device and the client side for a moment, we touch on this a bit later on, but everything within the client is encrypted. So everything, even the stuff that sits in RAM is encrypted. So all the manifests of the kind of where we're caching hotspot information, all the credentials, everything is encrypted on the device. So we're not just encrypting data in transit; we're encrypting data at rest on the client. Which is quite a lot of work. So as you're connecting to iPass, you're using a very rugged authentication scheme, which is very, very difficult to break into. All right. So once you've actually connected to iPass, then obviously the user is going to start sending data backwards and forwards. So we need to protect the data plane. So we have a couple of options there. So one is a service that's actually built into iPass that comes with it for free, which is kind of cool. And it's a last mile VPN service. So we can, and the user all iPass users have access to this service. We've actually made it by default available to everybody. A user, and we recommend that users tend to do this. So a user can activate the last mile VPN during their once they're online before they start logging into anything, and that builds the last mile VPN builds an encrypted VPN tunnel between the user's client to an access gateway in one of our data centers, and we automatically detect which is the closest data center based on round trip delay, so we keep latency down. Or as a user, if you want to force the VPN to go to a specific data center because you want Netflix to continue working while you're traveling or whatever, within the client you can actually nudge the client to say connect to a specific data center. And what the last mile VPN allows is to protect us from man-in-the-middle attacks and sniffing attacks related to user data that they're passing across the network. So going back to right at the beginning of this presentation, it kind of doesn't matter if it's a completely unsecured radio bearer. If there's no passwords or encryption on the radio bearer side, it doesn't really matter because we can encrypt across this last mile VPN and protect all the users' data. If you're so this little slide just kind of shows how it works. The other option that's talked about in this slide is corporate VPNs. So on the client side, we integrate in with a number of different VPN clients, including all the ones you can see on this slide. And the user experience is really pretty slick here. What we can do is we can automatically force that VPN client to start on the user's device and pass in credentials from the iPass client to that VPN. So you have the ability now, so that if somebody picks up a device and walks out of an enterprise and wants to continue to access enterprise services on the inside of the firewall, even if they're sitting in a coffee shop somewhere on completely unsecured Wi-Fi, we can securely log them into iPass and then automatically bring up a VPN tunnel using the enterprise's own VPN infrastructure back into the other side of the firewall to access that enterprise service. And that can be forced on so that a user kind of doesn't have a choice about whether that VPN, that corporate VPN is active or not. So as you can see here, we're building up this story in layers around, validating hotspots, secure authentication, VPN to secure the data plane, and then the next slide we'll talk about kind of what we do on the platform side, because we kind of talked about the service and how we secure the service, but there's not much point in securing the service if you don't secure the platform, because the platform's where a lot of stuff that people would like to get, it kind of lives, like PII and user login information and billing information and all that stuff. So we place great store in making sure that the infrastructure that we have is extremely secure and resilient. So all data at rest is encrypted, and all data in transit is encrypted between the clients and the cloud, and it's always encrypted in the cloud. All the data centers are SOC 2 compliant, and that's just table stakes, right? I mean, that's just what everybody should be doing. We also have very strict internal information security policies, right? It is very difficult, even as an iPass employee, to get access to certain types of data within iPass, and that's intentional to make sure that we are protecting partners and customers' PII information from, a rogue actor that may be an iPass, because it's perfectly possible that could happen one day. So we have very strict internal information security policies to make sure that only the right people are allowed to see the right the correct information. So we also continuously use industry standard pen test tools to pen test our network to make sure that we've not accidentally opened up a vulnerability. We do this on a regular basis. We also do it on request, for a bigger customer or a partner. If they say, yeah, we want a pen test and we want to use this specific tool, we want to be looking for these specific vulnerabilities, we'll run that pen test. In fact, I think we did one for a customer just recently, and to be candid, it flagged a couple of things that they want to see fixed, and we certainly agree. So we're working a way to get those things fixed. And our approach to security also starts really at the product development process. All the code that we crank out goes through, standardized first off, it goes through threat model analysis at a system level to make sure we're not doing something goofy in terms of the way that we're architecting stuff. And then the actual code goes through fuzz testing and static code analysis to make sure we're not introducing any vulnerabilities as we're cranking out new features in the product. We always go back and make sure that we're not adding in a vulnerability by mistake. So so the platform, we place great store by securing the platform as well as the client and the service and the connectivity between them. And with that in mind, we're actually, we're kind of looking at the next phase of our security architecture, and we're really starting to think about, okay, again, how do you look at the whole thing holistically? And how do you make sure that a really, really sophisticated attacker that is sophisticated enough to spoof, entire chunks of server infrastructure within the iPass network, how could we protect against somebody doing that and fooling a client into connecting to their infrastructure that's spoofing iPass rather than the real iPass? So we're doing a bunch of development right now around making sure that the client has always got high confidence around knowing that it's connected to the different infrastructure components that it needs to connect to within the iPass platform, and that's going to be rolling out over the next couple of 3 months or so. And that adds another layer of security onto the service, whereby we're continuously checking that nothing has injected itself in the middle of either the authentication path or the user data plane, and is stealing credentials or injecting bad data or is stealing user data. We're also potentially moving away from public certs and CAs and possibly even SSL as a way to encrypt and validate who's talking to who. There's been a few well-publicized instances around the CAs and some of the stuff that they've inadvertently done over the past year or so, and obviously there's some fairly well-known vulnerabilities around SSL, and it's so we're looking at that and going, is there something better and more obtuse that we can actually put into the platform that's going to deflect and defeat attacks as they get dreamt up. Another thing that we're actually noodling on right now, and we're in kind of two minds about this, is that we may be making some changes to the client to kind of notify the user that hey, you're in an area that's kind of a bad neighborhood in terms of Wi-Fi, right? We've detected rogue and malicious hotspots around here, either at this moment or we've seen previous instances of attacks here that have been deflected, but there are rogue actors in this area, and we're thinking about notifying users within the client, so that as well as having kind of a hotspot finder app within the client that shows, where to go to find iPass footprint, that we also kind of flag that footprint and said, we've seen X number of attacks around here, so, if you can go to the coffee shop across the road, that might be slightly better for you. We're kind of noodling that right now. The net is that if we can detect and deflect all attacks, then we probably don't need to be quite so chatty to the user and tell them all the time what's going on, because our user experience ethos over the years is we try to make the client as quiet as possible, so it's not throwing toasts up and notifications and telling you what's going on all the time. It just connects and just kind of gets on with stuff, because that's the idea of iPass, that it's supposed to be transparent in operation and just work. So there's a tension there around that, and we're just kind of working through that right now. You might see some changes in the client in the next couple of quarters to add those type of capabilities. Okay, so that's more or less what I wanted to talk about in terms of what we're doing around security. Quick word on iPass for the folks on the call who have never really kind of looked at iPass. We're a global connectivity provider. We have over 60 million hotspots under management in 120 different countries, and those are provided by over 160 different network vendors, and those include all the terrestrial providers, a lot supplied through carriers like AT&T and Wi-Fi. AT&T and BT, and an increasing amount of our footprint, an increasing amount of our revenue is actually coming from in-flight connectivity. So we're the exclusive enterprise reseller for GoGo on a global basis right now. And we also have a number of non-GoGo airline fleets. And we just recently announced United, and we're in the process of onboarding their 720 aircraft. I think a significant portion of those will be done by the end of the year. And the service itself is very easy to consume. It's you pay for it on a per user per month basis. Usage is unlimited, whether you're on the ground or in the air. And obviously the price goes down by volume. And all the stuff that I talked about today in terms of the last mile VPN, all the security stuff, it just comes with the service. It's all kind of built in. You don't have to pay extra for it or buy any additional over the top VPN services. So that's about it for today. I think we have a few questions coming out. The timing for the United onboarding is a question we've had coming in. We're working through it right now. We're actually working through the implementation right now. These things are seldom, especially for in-flight, they're seldom as straightforward as you might think, because there's all kinds of, as you probably know if you've ever used in-flight, there's all kinds of capture and all kinds of other weird stuff that goes on an aircraft. And also, not to go off on too much of a tangent, the user experience is quite hard to do on an aircraft, because sometimes you can connect to the Wi-Fi that's on the aircraft, but all you're really accessing is the in-flight entertainment and the portal that's on the aircraft. But the internet connection might not come active until you're at 10,000 feet. So being able to detect that and be able to tell the user when they can actually, start surfing the internet and making sure that's quite a slick user experience is surprisingly difficult. And it kind of varies by provider and airline how they implement all the APIs. So we're working through that with United right now. I can take your contact information and actually come back to you with a specific schedule. I know the first few aircraft are going to be coming on within the next quarter or so, but I don't know what the rollout is beyond that. The rollout can be sometimes very difficult. The rollout can be protracted, right? So another in-flight provider of ours, the aircraft actually has to come in through regularly scheduled maintenance to get the firmware update and get some new hardware to enable iPass. My understanding on the United case is that isn't the case, that we can integrate with what's already there, and that affects the schedule a great deal, as you might imagine. But I can get the schedule and get back to you on that. And Mary, of course, will follow up with. We will send an email out to all the attendees with a copy of these slides and and a recording of me babbling away. We have another question from a gentleman in HP. The last mile VPN on for all. Is it on for all iPass users by default, or is it always on? Yes, it is, and actually that's a fairly recent change that we did, and we actually. It's always been on for new iPass customers, and we've actually, I think over the last 2 weeks, we've actually gone back through all of our kind of customer accounts and activated it by default, because it wasn't on by default. So we expect to see a big uptick in last mile VPN usage over the next few weeks. I think. I've answered that one. Okay. If there are no more questions coming in, I would like to wish you a good rest of the day. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. You will be getting an email with the slides and a copy of the recording. If you've got any questions, in the meantime, if you're already an iPass customer, please reach out and contact your account manager, or you can email sales@ipass.com, and we have a bunch of material that's related specifically to our security story that we can actually provide you with. Some more last-minute questions here. Question here. Whenever we connect to Wi-Fi, we use corporate VPN. Yeah, I mean you can use the iPass last mile VPN, or you can use your corporate VPN. It kind of really doesn't matter. The net is that you actually have to use both of them separately. You can't use them together. And the reason for that is that we actually, depending on the platform, we use a common asset on the device that can't actually access two VPNs at the same time. But we can put policy on the device. That drives the user in one direction or the other. So the question here: how is iPass VPN better than corporate VPN? It's probably not. But if you don't have corporate VPN because you're a relatively small company and you want to protect your users' data and you don't want to be sending credentials around in the clear, and especially as you may be accessing a lot, as you're a smaller company, you may be accessing more services in the cloud perhaps than a larger enterprise. Then the iPass last mile VPN is a really good option there, because it's actually securing the data plane for those users for everything that they're doing. And yeah, another question about split tunneling. So obviously if you run a corporate VPN, this is a good question actually. So if you run your corporate VPN in a split tunnel mode, and just for the folks on the call that don't know what split tunnel is, in most corporate VPN implementations, you can configure them so that when the VPN's active, the client's active on the user's device, only data that's going to the enterprise is actually tagged, goes down the VPN, down the virtual pipe. Anything else that's not going to the enterprise, if you type, www.netflix.com. That gets peeled off and goes directly to Netflix. And some enterprises do this because they don't want the burden of all the traffic that might be going out to a cloud application to actually route all the way through the enterprise because it's introducing, it's more latency and it's sucking up more bandwidth that they have to pay for. Similarly, they might not want users' personal stuff to be routed through their network. Most companies, though, don't implement split tunnel VPN because they actually want everything to route through their especially if it's an enterprise device, they want everything to route through the enterprise for compliance purposes quite often. And they recognize that if you do use a split tunnel VPN and you're on really unsecured Wi-Fi with an open radio bearer, that stuff that doesn't go through the corporate VPN could actually be sent in the clear across an open radio bearer. So yeah, most sensible enterprises, I think, are not implementing split tunnel VPN. It's a great thing if you're at home, if you're a home worker, because you get good latency for all your apps. But if you're a mobile user and Wi-Fi user, split tunnel is really quite a bad idea. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have for today. I will wrap it up at this point. Thanks very much for attending this webinar. It's been my pleasure to talk about all these security issues. As I say, if you do want any more information, please do reach out to us at sales@ipass.com, and we'll get right back to you and we'll send you more information and also educate you about the iPass service. So thanks very much from me, Neil Griffiths, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.